Welcome to NACL's second Saltcast. Last time we had a great show. We talked about some of the shows we really liked last season, including Megalo Box and Darling and the Franxx. And this time we're going to follow up and talk about the endings, which both have had a lot of discussion around them and been really big in the community for different reasons. And they're worth comparing. So let's start with Megalo Box. I want to do a round robin of all our feelings, starting with David.
Megalo Box. I liked it. This was the recent anime with a late 90s, early 2000s nostalgia look, feel, sound, everything. It was a really good ride. High energy throughout, cohesive. The ending, maybe a little controversial. I will say, however, though, my favorite anime from like the 90s and 2000s also kind of had controversial endings. So interestingly enough, I got some of that as well. I loved it. I think it was a contender for the best one of the season.
Well, I loved this from episode 1. The soundtrack was incredible. The crushed down and then brought back up feel to make it look like it was late 90s, early 2000s. Mm-hmm. Great vintage look to it. The action was good. The storyboard, cohesive, tight. And I actually kind of enjoyed the ending. It maybe not have been everything that we wanted, but at the same time, it told its story well. And I, for one, think that this is a show that is a strong contender for Anime of the Year.
I mean, it's up against Devilman and Violet Evergarden, so it's a tough time. That said, it was my favorite show the past season, bar none, right up until the ending. Mm-hmm. And that threw that into question for me. I think I have, two problems with the show, really. One was that I felt it didn't have the catharsis of an underdog story that I'm looking for, of that final punch, that, that ultimate victory of, just... I felt like that was the story they were trying to tell. And that sort of brings me to my next point, which is, were they trying to tell an underdog story? Or were they trying to tell a story about, someone finding their true match, their fighting partner, their dancing partner, as they put it in the end? I didn't get that throughout most of the show. So to suddenly change notes, to me, was very jarring. And I get that it was an artistic decision. I just wish there had been a bit more foreshadowing, more leading up to that, as opposed to, they had this rap of two beasts fighting each other and one coming out on top. That was a big part of the show, and they kind of blue-balled us on it. They took it away. And at the last moment, cut to a year in the future, and instead of hype music that we've been accustomed to, they put on that weird dance polka. It was weird, and I don't understand why they ended on that. I really didn't believe they were going to do that when I listened to the soundtrack beforehand. They went ahead and did. It baffled me, and it made it hard for me coming out of it to think that's the show I'm going to recommend to everyone, when before it was unqualified. And now it feels like a qualified success. Like 12 episodes of pure awesome, 12 and a half episodes of pure awesome, really. Last half, it just, kind of sucks. No, the show does not suck. That sucks.
But that sucks.
Yeah. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? What are your counters to that?
So, I really feel like the foreshadowing was there, right? You had the intro, Joe being depicted as the black junkyard dog, running and eventually running into Yuri, this white beast, about the same size. And so, and then the cutaway of Joe's face, and he's found something here, right? And so I got that. To your point about the polka, final song, which did suck. Particularly because the opening and the intro and the outro sequences and the soundtrack was a must watch. Every single episode, I watched both the intro and the outro as part of that ride, and but I think that beyond the foreshadowing kind of being there, you did have a good chunk of the episode of Joe and Yuri wailing on each other, right?
Yeah.
So you did have the epic conclusion of a fight. With respect to the underdog piece, I think that went out the window when Yuri had his gear removed, right? And so, he was the underdog up to this point with the gimmicky gearless Joe piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's fighting all of these people with this mechanical advantage, if you will.
Not even if you will, straight up mechanical
Yeah.
advantage. There was the guy in episode 3, I think. He straight up punched through a brick wall.
Which, okay, we can have a whole different discussion about the role that mechanical boxing gloves played in the show.
Yeah, fair.
Because ultimately, I would argue, didn't really matter. The robotic arms were not a theme that they actually played to for the most of the show.
Right.
And I would argue that that's actually part of the show part of the point that the show is trying to make. It's not about the gimmicks. It's not about the mechanical advantages. It's not about everything else. It's not the big flash, which was presented here as Megalo Boxing. The whole story is about people. It's about the men who are wearing the mechanical gloves. It's about the men who are in the ring fighting. And how good the fight is measured by how good the dance is, as they're putting it in the last episode. So yes, he found his dance partner. He made his progression. He found what he was looking for in Yuri. I think we can all agree, yes, the ending was controversial, and we would have all loved, 39 uninterrupted minutes of Yuri and Joe wailing on each other.
And the final punch.
See, I definitely agree it's about the characters, but I thought that the character objective was for Joe to prove himself, and that was epitomized in his victory.
Mm-hmm.
And
I didn't think it was epitomized in him finding his rival. He found his rival. I guess getting his rival's respect was key, but oftentimes getting your rival's respect entails beating them. And the show did, in fact, do that. He did win. They just didn't want to show us that for some reason. And I think that they were very aware of the decision to cut it out. I mean, I think this was planned.
that it couldn't have been any other way as far as how they executed it.
True. But especially considering the change in musical style, the change in visual style, it's like they knew they were playing a joke on you. I mean, it does seem like a punchline. And the Scorpion, I mean, having specifically brought up the Scorpion leaving, it further indicates that it's like, we didn't sting you. It really is a punchline. It's like
A punch
God,
line.
yeah, shut up. I don't know what to say. Like it does feel like a joke.
I don't know. And we've talked, in other venues about how the Joe's death being foreshadowed, throughout this entire series, and that and I feel like the way that they ended it, they probably planned it, right? Because it was the artistic conclusion that they were looking for. But ultimately, I think that, maybe this was the ending that pleased the most people, right? You might have some folks who are disappointed. You might have some folks who are offended, but Joe didn't die. Joe won, ultimately. Joe, comes out on top, and ultimately, everybody is, the happy family. unit, at the end, having dinner with polka music.
Joe didn't even get crippled.
He didn't.
No, but Yuri did.
Yeah.
And so, so for whatever it's worth, it seemed like, regardless of the art direction, it did in maybe the only way that it could have, So
maybe so. Well, I think that we can all agree that that's not the case for Darling and the Franxx. I think it's time we delve into that.
Yes.
Just a segue away.
Yeah.
Do you want to start with your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I guess I have high hopes for Studio Trigger. Let me just disclaimer. I have a young daughter, so and her favorite anime right now is Little Witch Academia, and so me hoping that Studio Trigger is going to provide I don't know, something else I can watch with my daughter. Is in the back of my mind, but it certainly was not the case with Darling and the Franxx.
Give up on that.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to happen, right? And so Little Witch Academia is probably going to be the outlier of all of their offerings, right? Their portfolio. And so, what can you say? Homage to Neon Genesis Evangelion, probably my favorite anime of all time. But they weren't ever subtle about it. Beautiful animation, beautiful anime. High budget, certainly that. Thematically, it had a lot of really shining moments, throughout the series. I'm not sad that I watched it. Let's put it that way. I'm not sad that I, went through 25, 26 episodes of this series for whatever it's worth. But I don't know. Alex, jump in.
For me, this was a show that took place in three distinct ways, three distinct arcs. And you had your first 8-ish episodes of what is kind of your standard shonen mech series with heavy ecchi elements thrown in. You had butt controls for the mechs. You had an acid monster that didn't damage the mech that they're piloting, didn't damage their controls or the skin of the pilots, but it did damage the bodysuits that the girls are wearing. You had a beach episode that was all about showcasing the girls in skimpy outfits, and then, oh, hey, wait, we're going to give the most curious one a book explaining what pregnancy is and how you get pregnant. And that was all the first arc of the show, as far as I'm concerned. They started getting away from the main characters and started focusing on the world building and the secondary characters. The fights got tighter, the art direction got better, the storyboarding got better. The episode, I think it was called GN, right before a mid-season break happened, and that was... I have no qualms about that episode whatsoever. No qualifiers. It was great. Mm-hmm. They come back strong, more world building, more character development. And then Arc 3 happens, and suddenly we're fighting Klaxosaur princesses and alien eldritch beings.
Well, it wasn't the Klaxosaur princess, because I think it was always moving in that direction. It was Klaxosaur princess and then aliens.
The aliens were the really jarring part, we'll be honest. Yeah. Super gigantic mechs fighting in space against entire planetary defense systems. Main character piloting this mech while the female, 02, was on Earth petrified as a statue, but her mind is mentally walking down the space aisle. I think Gunbuster was the reference there.
Parts of it. I'll go into that.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Yeah. You're better qualified. I'll leave that for you. But the point being is where the hell were aliens ever
They
mentioned before the last part? So this is a show that, to me, broke its base at least twice. And while the last episode wrapped it up about as well as it could have been wrapped up, this is a show that leaves me confused and wondering what the hell I just watched.
Yeah.
I think I've said all I need to say on that one.
Yeah,
Marnix?
I mean, that's accurate. I mean, I'll disagree that I do think that it was always trying to be all three things that you saw, except maybe the aliens. Not the aliens. In that, yeah, it was trying to be something serious from the get-go. It was more than just an ecchi show. That was clear from their ambitious mirroring of a bunch of Evangelion scenes.
Right.
The call to action with the injured girl begging the feckless hero to get in a mech when he's all depressed.
Shinji.
Getting the damn robot hero. Oh my god, his name. Lots of bad puns with the names. But ultimately, it's just so tonally jarring throughout to have this really goofy premise of mechs piloted by girls' asses and a version of Sele from Evangelion wearing monkey masks. I mean, it's so absurd, and it just gets more so. And it gets more so in surprising ways, which is impressive, because to go from that to, holy shit, aliens, and we're suddenly going to go into space battles, to literally having a giant wedding mech walking down the space aisle, as you said, through a gate created by the moons of Mars, wielding a planet-sized bomb that just appeared out of nowhere. And the mech is actually Flesh and Blood 02. She's like the size of a planet. It's meant to be beautiful and touching and emotional, and it's just laughable. You're just laughing the whole time.
So I think that was also like end of Evangelion.
Well, it's specifically a Gunbuster reference. Because in Gunbuster, the ending plot was they hollowed out Jupiter to create a giant bomb, which they took across the universe to blow up the space aliens. But that was the plot of the whole 6-episode OVA.
So I just meant the giant mech being the flesh and blood incarnation of 02. Yeah. So,
yeah. Okay. Sure. And then, of course, at the end of Gunbuster, after they've successfully detonated the bomb, the two pilots of Gunbuster drift back to Earth, not as souls of two blue and red Onis, but physically. They don't suddenly introduce this concept of a soul that can be reincarnated as little girls in a cherry tree. It boggles the mind. I really don't know how they had such a miscommunication, it seems, between the different teams working on this show, that they never got down what they were trying to do with it. And it's just such a stark contrast from Megalo Box.
It is. And it's ultimately sad because the show was highly ambitious. It took on some really interesting social themes. Futoshi and the bigger guy and his eating disorder, intersex and same-sex individuals and relationships, different like piloting combinations and things like that. It was really ambitious, but it felt like those were just sprinkled plot points.
They were too scared to actually go into those.
And they
maybe a bit, yeah.
And they brought them up, but never did anything with them.
Well, you had 02 and Hero, the main two, and they were just chemistry from episode 1, soulmates. I am going to pilot with you, and this is going to be the way it is. You had Ichigo and Goro, and Ichigo was pining after Hero, and Goro was just the patient love that Ichigo deserved, and eventually saw and came to love. As you said, there are other character interactions as well. You had the hot-blooded couple who obviously had dynamism, and at the end had something like 6 kids.
They actually had the best chemistry of any of the characters, in my opinion. I thought, for example, Hero and 02. 02 has chemistry as a character. She's a charismatic character that everyone fell in love with from episode 1. But actually, their interactions together were very stilted. Hiro is not a great wall to bounce off of as a character.
No.
And when they actually embraced their love after that amazing climax in episode 15 or 14, GN, which was an amazing episode. I agree with both of you.
Yes.
After that, it was just sort of
Okay,
lame
I
and
love
sappy.
it.
It almost neutered Zero too. Like, she was no longer an interesting character,
Right.
and that's not because she suddenly has a love interest. It's because they don't really care about her character anymore. It's sort of they go and talk about Kokoro and Mitsuru's thing, and they go talk about they just become this perfect couple over here. They occasionally rehash the "I have to go save you from the mech" arc. They do that twice for some reason.
In
Because
like
they
4
almost
episodes.
wanted to recapture episode 14, and it just. They could have spent so much time pacing this and going over into some of the interesting themes that they wanted to discuss, and maybe hint at aliens at some point, actually bring that up. But, they could have skipped the aliens. I would have been fine with that. But go into more of what Ikuno's role is in this. I mean, they have her as this romantic tension, which they do have a sort of touching moment where, I guess Ichigo recognizes the humanness of not being able to be with who you love.
Right.
Which, okay, you've empathized with the lesbian character, but then you just have her sacrifice herself the one time, and then suddenly later she's a scientist who cures all the problems in the world. What was her purpose as a character, really? I don't feel like they explored the valuable part of it, especially not for Japanese culture, and they didn't explore her character in how they ended up using her. They just wrote her off as a "I'm going to solve problems" character later off screen. They did that with a lot of characters.
Right.
They had the foreshadowing of this aging problem, which they solved off screen through Ikuno. They never really brought to light a lot of the plot threads, and I think that comes from that lack of communication or that lack of planning that the show clearly
and
had.
ultimately the plot threads were wrapped up in a very rushed kind of after the fact, sort of manner, which that was all part of the last episode.
Ikuno helped Futoshi get over his eating disorder, also off screen.
Oh,
And it's just
that's a good point.
Yeah.
what is? I don't understand what the plan was for all these different plot threads that you just decided to abandon in favor of a lot of wasted episodes. It seems like that just didn't have anything important happening in them.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to the original point is two very different shows ending in two very different ways. You have something that's tight and well written, storyboarded with one overarching goal, and even though some of the sequences are more artistic choices than action oriented choices, every single scene, every single frame, every single song in some way advances the plot towards the end goal, which they obviously had in mind before they got started.
It was all really well planned.
Yeah.
And versus Darling, which broke its base twice that I can count and seemed to introduce a lot of ideas and had nowhere to go with them, so they just wrapped them up real quick at the end, and it just sort of left you hanging.
It's just over ambitious.
Their ambition certainly did not match their courage in this case. They had a lot of ambition and didn't actually have the heart to go through with it, which I can't help thinking or hoping that Trigger would have done if it weren't for whatever partnership they were going on that wasn't well managed. Because it's not like Trigger to not have the courage to go the whole way. That's just not Trigger's style.
Kill a Kill, Gurren Lagann.
Exactly.
Anyway, I think that wraps up our thoughts on both these shows pretty nicely. We do have some announcements. We're all very excited for all three of us both. Excited for our back to school special coming up on August 6th, 7:30 p.m. at Kaiju. We're showing Oran High School Host Club, which is, I think, accurately summarized as high school boys with far too much time on their hands serving high school girls with even more time on their hands. Essentially, the plot of this is this girl walks into the club room of the Oran High School Host Club and promptly stumbles on a vase, which she breaks, and is tethered into working for them as part of the club, and hijinks ensue. The next one is Cromartie High School, which is one of my favorite comedies. It's hilarious. I I think accurately summarized again as just a bunch of giant idiot goofball delinquents hanging out with Freddie Mercury and a robot. What more do you want from a show? It's just amazing. If you want to know more, definitely come see it. If you've already seen them, come hang out and laugh. It's a good time. Also to mention, last time we did a question. 3 favorite swordsmen. We had a few options listed. I won't go into them because I'll get them wrong. We forgot to post the question. That's the long and short of it. Mm-hmm. Our fault. Too bad. We're not going to do that one. It's all fine. We're going to move on to the next question, which is, what shows are you excited about this season? A new season has started out. There's a lot of options. Not any clear, obvious standouts that anyone would necessarily call out anime of the season for this one. Maybe you do. But I'm curious to know, and we're all curious to know, what your choices are.
For me, I'm being the mainstream weeb here. I'm sticking with some of the established titles. I'm watching My Hero Academia. I'm watching Overlord. I'm watching Boruto. And I'm enjoying all of them very well. Mm-hmm. But we have other shows. Last time we were talking about a show called Banana Fish. It's apparently on Amazon. And who knows? We, by all means, have very limited time to actually look into some of these shows. Maybe we've missed something.
Yeah, excited to hear your feedback and figure out what's the show to watch this season.
Yeah, let us know.
Great, that's a wrap. Later, guys. Saltcast out.